everyone. As people are kind of joining in and joining the workshop, I'll introduce the program real quickly. Well, welcome to our iLead presentation. So today we have Anti-Blackness, addressing how anti-Blackness is perpetuated in our communities. Today we'll be having this presentation by Isabella Emanesque and Giselle Vincent, who are social justice educators from the Cross-Cultural Center. And we also have a couple friends from the Cross-Cultural Center joining us here today. My name's Natalie. I'm one of the communication and leadership assistants at CSI, so I help out with iLead program. And I'll be in the chat for the rest of the program if you guys have any questions or if anyone needs specific iLead questions answered. So to inform y'all a little more about iLead, here are requirements. So there are 2 ways to receive your iLead completion. That's either by getting 6 stamps or 10 stamps and attending these workshops. You get your certificate of completion with both 6 and 10 stamps, but with 10 stamps, you'll also get validation on your co-curricular record. And that goes with, you would have to submit a 1-page written reflection or typed reflection that you email to us. And you can email that to us at ccl@ucsd.edu. So if any time during this workshop you get cut off, you can email us there, which you shouldn't. You should be able to rejoin this workshop relatively easy. But if you have any questions, you can still email us at our email down at the bottom, ccl@ucsd.edu. You do have to register for most of all our iLeads on our website beforehand, and our website is iLead.ucsd.edu, which you can see in the right corner over here. For full credit, you have to attend the entirety of the workshop and to have the full credit. So at the end of the workshop, I'll be sending out a Google form link where you can fill out your attendance, and then we'll email you back on how to get your attendance credit for that. We will cross-reference from the Zoom attendance, so whoever's in the Zoom call and whoever fills out the form, whoever does both, will get attendance credit. But yeah, so you have to stay until the end and for the entirety of the workshop in order to receive credit, and I will be sending that out in the chat. So with that, I'll send that back to our presenters for today.
Okay, sorry about that. Now with that, we'll get started. So first, a disclaimer. This webinar will be recorded and later on posted to UCSD's Cross-Cultural Center's YouTube page. So that means if for any reason you have to leave early and you want to go back and watch the rest of it from start to finish, you can do so on YouTube. But also, even though it will be recorded, no one's faces will be recorded except for ours, and you'll also be able to see the presentation itself. Next, we'll be using Google Slides closed captioning. Let me turn that on now. Okay, so I'll be using Google Slides closed captioning. So if there are any words that are not precisely what we said, please excuse us. And with that, we'll be getting started.
Thank you all for tuning into our workshop. Today we will be discussing anti-Blackness and how anti-Blackness is perpetuated in our communities. So before we begin, we want to give a land acknowledgement. Although we aren't in the territory where UCSD currently resides due to quarantine measures, it's still important to recognize our positionality as settler colonial beings on this nation. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and read the statement. As UC San Diego sits on the unsettled territory and traditional homelands of the Kumeyaay people, we as members of the UC San Diego community must acknowledge the legacy of the Kumeyaay people. Please join me in a moment of silence to honor the original people of this land. So we're now going to do our introductions. My name is Isabella. My gender pronouns are she, her, and hers. I'm currently a 4th year. I'm double majoring in ethnic studies and history and minoring in educational studies. I'm one of the social justice educator interns at the Cross-Cultural Center.
Sorry, hi, my name is James. My pronouns are he, him, his. I am also a social justice educator intern at the Cross. I am a 5th year. My major is applied mathematics, and I have a minor in African American studies.
Hi everyone, my name is Giselle, she, her pronouns. I am also a social justice educator intern at the Cross Cultural Center. I am a 3rd year political science and ethnic studies double major.
Okay, so now we'll be going over the community guidelines. So first off, inclusive language. This mostly will apply for us since we will be the ones talking the most, but if at any point you have questions for us or if you have statements about the presentation or anything that we've said, this also will apply. So making sure you are using and being respectful of people's gender pronouns. As we just did in the last slide, we all introduce ourselves with our gender pronouns, so please be respectful of those. Next is leaning into your discomfort. This is not necessarily a topic that is enjoyable to discuss or hear about. So we encourage everyone to lean into your discomfort because you might be uncomfortable hearing about the conversation or thinking about the different topics we'll be talking about. But that is very often where we have the chance to learn. Next is I statements. So understanding that just because you have a belief or an idea of something does not mean that that can be generalized. Me saying that I like ice cream or I like milkshakes does not mean that everyone does. Next, challenge the idea, not the person. This will come up later as well, but this means that if you hear or someone shares an idea about any topic that we're discussing and you do not agree with the idea, make sure you're challenging the idea that was presented, not attacking the person or challenging that person. Next is brave space versus a safe space. We want to say from the beginning that we cannot guarantee a safe space, but what we do provide hopefully is a brave space where people are able to come out and feel brave enough to either share their own stories or to listen to others or be able to lean into their discomfort. If there are any additional guidelines that you would like to add on, you can put them in the chat and we'll go over them as they come. So we'll be moving on for now.
So now we're going to get started with the presentation. This is a discussion question that we want to start with you all, and it is, what is your understanding of anti-Blackness? So if you could go ahead and put that in the chat, make sure your chat setting is for all panelists and attendees so that everyone can kind of get an idea of what is being said. And we'll give you all a few minutes to put down your ideas. So I'll just read them as they come in. One person said, anti-Blackness and anti-Black racism almost always get left behind. Another person said, prejudice against Black people. Another person said, anti-Blackness is the many ways our society subtly teaches us negative/racist ideas and stereotypes about Black people, settled on several centuries of historical racism and maintained through institutions. Anti-Blackness is racism that specifically affects the Black community, either the conscious or subconscious efforts to break down Black people, either personally or through systems. Anti-Blackness is used to describe prejudice against Black people, ignoring or minimizing experiences of Black people, hostile behavior towards Black people, bias based on people's skin color, systems and social structures put in place that go against the growth of prosperity of Black people, the perpetuation of libel and propaganda against people of any African American heritage. My understanding of anti-Blackness is any form of idea or action that does not acknowledge the dignity or of Black people, racism that affects the Black community and ignoring their hardships, For non-Black people with dark skin, such as in Native Americans and Filipinos, some of the racism experience is rooted in anti-Blackness, racism towards Black people, stereotyping microaggressions, and oppression of Black people in society, trying to ignore Black culture and the struggles that are faced by the community, excuse me. And then it says anti-Blackness is an ingrained bias against Black and Black identifying people that affects almost every aspect of life. So thank you all very much for sharing. That was quite a lot of you, and all of your ideas are really great. So to kind of give you guys just a brief definition, what is anti-Blackness? Our definition is anti-Blackness is resistant or antagonistic to Black people or their values or objectives. And so this is kind of a short definition, but as we go on with the different examples, we'll provide more in-depth context of what we're talking about.
So why is it important to understand anti-Blackness, and why are we talking about it? Why are there several workshops that are held about anti-Blackness? And to sort of answer that question in short, anti-Blackness is used as a tool to perpetuate uneven power relations and structures. And before I go into talking about how that occurs, I want to read this quote by Audre Lorde, a quote that I really appreciate and have used for several other workshops that we've had. So I'm going to go ahead and read it. "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. They may allow us temporarily to beat him at his own game, but they will never allow us to bring about genuine change." And I think this quote is very relevant in terms of answering the question to how why anti-Blackness is important. And just to provide a quick example before we provide several more examples throughout the presentation, anti-Blackness is used as a tool to elevate certain folks, whether that's communities of color or other individuals, and also while elevating certain folks at the top, it's also used as a mechanism to continue to oppress the Black community. And one important thing that we want to address before moving on with the presentation is distinguishing the generalization that Black people should be categorized within the people of color group. There should be a distinguishing, or these two identities should be distinct from one another, that people of color and Black people should be separate because their experiences are extremely different, and that Black people face a type of anti-Blackness that can't be relatable for people of color. And by generalizing them into one category, it erases the experiences that Black people experience since the beginning of slavery and the legacies of their history. So now we're going to be talking about conservatism, liberalism, and what exactly it has to do with anti-Blackness. So this is a graphic that I found online describing and comparing both conservatives and liberals with one another. And I'm using these two main political ideologies that are promoted in the US as a nation state. And my question is, which political ideologies are anti-Black? And I want you all to engage with this for maybe a minute, and then I'm going to go ahead and explain a little bit more about what I mean for this question. Okay, now that you all have had an overview of what these different labels are, oftentimes when we think of conservatives or what we see on media, conservatives, particularly Republicans, are portrayed as people who are conservative and generally don't have an open mindset towards anything and are more protective of private property, whereas liberals, more specifically Democrats, are associated with being more progressive, more accepting of different identities, and are associated with wanting different forms of properties to be more regulated so that folks have access to all these different types of benefits. But when we think about which political ideologies are anti-Black, conservative folks are often associated with being anti-Black. However, I want to challenge that idea and argue that anti-Blackness is not specific to an ideology. Rather, whether folks are progressive or not, people can still produce anti-Black rhetoric. So this is another discussion question, and this is more general. How is anti-Blackness perpetuated? And then you all can answer that in the chat. Someone said colorblind mentalities, media, through jokes, with stereotyping in the media, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, subtle microaggressions through different forms of media, TV, movies, songs, etc. Within racism, on dating apps, it is perpetuated by movies and songs. Through social media. Thank you all for sharing. There's another one. By minimizing or just not listening to the experiences of Black people. I think that's very relevant with the colorblind mentality and how the colorblind mentality promotes this type of erasure that doesn't address the experiences of Black people as well as others. Through family members, complimenting people on their light skin. So yeah, colorism. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and move forward with the conversation. Thank you.
Okay, so in case anyone is not very familiar with the way TikTok has been as in the last, I want to say like month or two. Well, in general, the app has always had very racist posts, but they were always either semi-ignored or they were just not happening as frequent as they are now. But within the last 2 months and definitely the last month, there's been a really big increase in the different racist TikToks that have come out. So the video that we're going to show is a news broadcasting that talks about one of the racist TikToks that went very, very viral. Oh, whoops.
And then we have eat watermelon and fried chicken.
Fried chicken,
Yeah.
watermelon? Yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, you heard that right. A shocking racist video going viral tonight and putting the spotlight on two local teenagers. The video sparking outrage on Twitter after it was initially posted on the app TikTok. CBS 46's Tracy Bragg spoke to students about this disturbing video.
It's a growing social media trend where you take water and pour it into a bucket to visually show the recipe to create something. In a video released last night, the normally innocent and uplifting challenge was used to promote hate.
Today we're making. First we have.
I thought, why would somebody make a video like this just for like entertainment purposes?
Today I caught up with Carrollton High School student athlete Juan Nieves and a few of his teammates. The racist video two of their classmates made.
Next we have. Don't have a dad.
Dad? Yeah.
Yeah.
Was on everyone's mind.
I walk through the halls with those folks and see that they think about us like that.
Next we have. rob people.
Specifically whites, yeah, they do that.
In the racist viral TikTok video, the two students used derogatory ingredients.
Next one is make good choices. Let's see.
There's nothing there.
Terrell Carmichael knows both students in the video.
They would not normally talk like this. That was a complete surprise to everybody in our school.
After the video was released, Carrollton High School's principal launched an investigation. In a statement, he said, even if the offending incident was recorded after school hours, it doesn't alleviate the student's responsibility to uphold a high standard of behavior. Carrollton City Schools Superintendent Dr. Mark Albertus said he, quote, was deeply disturbed by the overt racist tone of the TikTok video. The district expelled both students by 3 p.m. Friday.
That was the best way to handle it, in my opinion.
Both students I spoke to today tell me the racist views portrayed in that TikTok video are not shared by the majority of the students here at Carrollton High School. Reporting in Carrollton, I'm Tracy Bragg.
Okay, so something that's important to note about the video is, one, this is not something that is, it's not unique in the sense that this is not the only type of video that has been posted within the last 2-3 weeks. Secondly, the message that's sent with the video, aside from obviously, I guess the implied racism within it, there's also different levels of microaggressions that can be found within it that have more effect than a lot of people can realize. Because when you think about who's actually watching these different TikToks and who these people are interacting with, maybe these people are interacting with fellow Black students who are in elementary school, middle school, who are still trying to understand their identity as a human being, let alone as a Black human being in America. So that in itself, that interaction could then be harmful to how their upbringing goes, their identity within themselves. And there's a lot of different layers to how this can harm Black people of any age and any different level. So we wanted to make sure we touched on TikTok when we're talking about this, because otherwise it wouldn't be as accurate to this day and age.
So another example of where we see the anti-Black framework is through horror. And this is something that I recently found out about last year. So essentially the question I'm going to answer in this specific slide is, how does horror perpetuate anti-Blackness? And horror as a genre in and of itself, anti-Blackness is basically the foundation of the horror genre, and these are what most film theory or film researchers have argued, and I'm going to go more in depth with what I mean by that. So essentially, horror as a genre it promotes anti-Black commentary and anti-Black propaganda, and what I mean by that is horror novels and film depict attitude. The people creating these films and authors are depicting their attitudes towards non-whites or the other, specifically Black folks. And it's a way to invoke fear towards the other. And we can think about how there have been racist remarks in works like Frankenstein as early as 1800s. And then when we think about the 1960s and 70s and another civil rights movement in horror films, a lot of the times these media is catered to people who have access to a privilege in order to watch these films. And in these horror films, they are using the civil rights movement as a background in order to invoke that fear. And basically, filmmakers are using stereotypes and tropes to represent who is depicted as the savior, who is the monster or the evil entity. And then another example of that is how setting and lighting is used as a way to determine who is the hero and who is not. So like darkness is often associated with tension or like suspense, fear, and then lightness is associated with sanctuary or safety. And an example of a film that came out in 1968 was The Night of the Living Dead by George A. Romero. And in that film, there was explicit racism towards Black folks, in which Black folks were represented as zombies. And it also depicts Black folks not having agency. They're dehumanized and depicted as zombies and are considered slow-witted, moving slowly. And then, and then Giselle has another example.
Yeah, so also looking at like the spoof horror movies, like the scary movie franchise, how they're supposed to be spoofs off of other horror movies, they use this like in the series you'll see them using like overtly racist jokes towards black people as a way for them to kind of call out these actors or these directors and the actors who perpetuate these stereotypes in their movies, and it also kind of gives us a look into um, how like anti-black they're actually being when you see that like the black character in the scary movie says stuff like, why do I have to go first? Why am I the one that always has to die first? And stuff like that.
And more on that topic, we see Black directors such as Jordan Peele, who's using his platform to use that as a point of intervention and shifting the narrative from talking about white people usually depicted as the savior, and shifting it to that Black folks do have agency and they do have the ability to survive until the end of the film. And then one thing I also forgot to mention was that because when thinking about representation, back in the day when like they didn't really have people of color or Black people in films, they used different types of monsters to depict them and invoke that fear. And typically the protagonist of the story is typically a real human, or like they have human attributes, and the other is depicted as this monstrous being. Now we're gonna move on.
Okay, so now we'll be talking about cultural appropriation. I'm going to talk about it, I will be talking about hair in particular. So first, I wanted to ask you all what you feel the difference is between appreciation and appropriation. Again, I really want to stick to the community guidelines. So if someone presents an idea that you do not necessarily agree with, remember to, if you would like to challenge the idea, make sure you're challenging the idea, not the person. And also remember, this is a brave space. So someone sharing their own opinion on it may really be stepping out in their own comfort and out of their comfortability to do so. So please make sure you're wearing cognizant of that. But also, yeah, we want to see what you all feel is the difference. I've heard from a lot of people that the line between the two is very, very thin and hard to find. I've heard from other people that there's a very distinct and sharp difference. So please let us know what you think in the chat, and we'll put a timer on for a few minutes. Okay, appreciation is complimenting while appropriation is imitating. Appropriation is when you change the meaning and or culture more than just wearing. You act a certain way or comment negatively when wearing or to describe what they are wearing. Appreciation involves giving credit where it is due. Appropriation is stealing. Appreciation is taking something and glorifying it for its value. Appropriation is taking something that is very culturally relevant to that specific group and using it as something irrelevant or defaming it in a sense. From what I've heard, appropriation is taking something from someone else's culture for your own benefit. Appreciation focuses on understanding the culture, while appropriation focuses more on the looks. Appreciation is praise for a certain aspect of the culture, but appropriation is an imitation of an aspect of the culture that offends the culture and the people that belong to it. Appreciation is allowed by the culture, and you acknowledge where the cultural product came from and its history. Appropriation is taking it without permission or acknowledgement. Appropriation is when outsiders use or profit off of culture. Take things from the culture and wear it as a costume or something you can take off at the end of the day when you're uncomfortable is appropriation. Appreciation, empowering someone and acknowledging individuality and uniqueness. Appropriating is taking said trend for oneself without credit where it's due. Appreciation causes direct harm to communities the culture is taken from. Also, it is often used for profit with nothing being given to the right communities. Yeah, all of you gave very in-depth and, in my opinion, accurate depictions of the two. And thank you for this level of participation. It's always really fun when we're able to interact with the crowd this much, so it's kind of nice. So I'm going to go in depth a little bit about the difference. I'm going to be more so talking, but the difference between cultural appreciation versus appropriation. So for appreciation, it is someone who seeks to understand or learn about another culture in an effort to broaden their perspective and connect with others cross-culturally. Cultural appropriation is taking one aspect of a culture that is not your own and using it for your own personal interest. So when we talk about personal interest, this could be monetary profit, this could be in regards just to looks, this could be in regards to a fashion sense, or in general to a psychosocial status. So I'm going to talk about cultural appropriation juxtaposed to Black hair, in particular locks. So I'll be giving an example. So as you can all see in the webinar, I have locks. I've had them for, I think, 3 years and 3 months, or 3 years and 4 months in this May. And if I were to right now give a webinar or tutorial on how to start locks or how to take care of locks, in my opinion, now everyone would be given a choice on whether they were going to appropriate or appreciate. And to me, the difference in regards to that would be, from my opinion, appropriation in that moment would be trying to create locks for yourself because you think they look cool, you think you just like the style overall, or trying to have someone help you with the upkeep of your own locks and you're not Black. While the appreciation would be understanding the history behind it. So, for example, Black hair has gone through a very large revolutionary change in how Black people have viewed their own hair. Because if we're going back to before the slave era, different hairstyles within the different countries of Africa weren't as what we may see depicted now. There are very much things like this where people are growing their hair out, they're styling it, they're putting all these different styles within their hair. And with the coming of the slave era and transatlantic slave trade, having so many Black people who are stripped of their culture, hair also started to lose its importance. And very often, that's when we got to the era where Black hair was deemed as ugly. If it wasn't straight, and if it was curly or kinky, then it was considered undesirable. And in the last 100 or so years, we've gotten to the point where Black hair is being appreciated to an incredible extent within the Black community, which is why very often there's a lot of different appreciation posts of Black hair, whether it's people having afros, or they have fades, or they have locks, or they have cornrows, or anything in between, or anything of that nature. So understanding that and being able to look back at that history and say, this is, obviously it came from a tragic place, but where it's grown to now and seeing what it actually means to this group of people in itself is important and beautiful, because that can also help your cultural understanding of what a lot of people of color or Black people have had to go through, either because of the history of this country or the history of the world. And that is where, in my opinion, this definition of appreciation comes in, of being able to connect with others cross-culturally and understanding the different cultural meanings and the significance of different cultural aspects within multiple cultures, aside from just taking things from the culture because you like it. That to me is the difference between them. To me, it's not necessarily as fine of a line as a lot of people would like to make it seem. There are obviously different examples where it can be viewed as a fine line, but this is the sharpest definition or visual representation of cultural appropriation that I'd be able to give you.
Now, transitioning from mass media and mass culture and how anti-Blackness is perpetuated through them, we're now going to be talking about anti-Blackness within communities, specifically marginalized communities. So before we proceed with discussing the examples we've provided, although it's not the extensive amount of examples given the limited time, it's important to understand intersectionality when we discuss the next few slides. So intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, who is pictured on the right. And this is just a short definition that I found. Of course, she does provide a more extensive definition on her TED Talk that you can find on YouTube. I'm just gonna go ahead and read this. So intersectionality is the interconnected nature of social categorizations such as race, class, and gender as they apply to a given individual or group regarded as creating overlapping and interdependent systems of discrimination or disadvantage. So what exactly does intersectionality have to do with anti-Blackness? It has a lot to do with anti-Blackness, considering that her argument was in regards to that, and also when thinking about proximity to whiteness as a property, and what, not necessarily like whiteness as a skin color, but whiteness in terms of who has access to certain privileges that put them at an advantage. So now we're going to be discussing the model minority myth, and this is another short definition. So the model minority myth is a stereotype used against Asians and Asian Americans who are perceived as successful, docile, and respectable. And typically this framework is used to compare Asian American community with other marginalized groups, basically saying, oh, if Asians and Asian Americans can achieve success in the United States, if they can achieve their American dream, how come other marginalized communities can't? And that is often used as a rhetoric. And it's also important to think about how the model minority myth is used to elevate Asian Americans in systems of power, but still continuing to oppress them in some sort of way. But with that elevation comes with oppressing another group of individuals, specifically the Black community. So it's often used in conjunction with one another as they work together.
So now we're going to get into anti-Blackness towards Afro-Latinx folks in the Latinx community. So anti-Blackness comes from the idea of, the phrase here says, hay que mejorar la raza, meaning we have to better our race. So in most Latinx cultures, being mixed with something is seen as being less, which is where we get the term mulatto from. And this can mean anything from being like mixed with like Latinx and Black, or like white and Black. So anywhere where there's a mix, it's seen as less because they have this idea of keeping the race pure. And so this is most common in countries with a high population of Afro-Latinx folks, for example, in Puerto Rico, Colombia, or in Ecuador. An example of this is Amara La Negra, who is pictured here. She is a musician. She is Dominican, and both of her parents are Dominican. She is Dominican. She identifies as an Afro-Latina, and a lot of the times she is told that she shouldn't be calling herself La Negra, which translates to the Black girl, because it's not proper. And a lot of the times people will like ask her why she feels the need to appropriate Black culture when because of the fact that she has like light colored eyes and she has dark skin. So people think that she does blackface and that her afro is fake, when it's actually all natural and this is who she is. So throughout her career, everybody kind of tries to influence her to get away from being proud that she is Black and being more Latina, if that makes sense. And so she was on a interview with the Breakfast Club, and Charlamagne Tha God told her that she wasn't Black, that she was a Latina with an afro. And throughout this entire interview, she was constantly defending herself and trying to get them to understand that a lot of Afro-Latinx folks go through the same situation where people are trying to erase their Blackness because they don't want them to be impure.
So before we discuss this part of the presentation, I want to provide another example for the model minority myth, which I forgot to do, which is that if we think about Asian-owned beauty supply stores and where they're strategically placed, it's important to recognize they're placed in Black and brown communities where they profit off Black people. However, as we've seen on media and the news, A lot of the times these owners inflict violence or police or follow Black folks within the store, speculating certain behavior that's ingrained, whether that's through implicit bias or explicit. And yeah, that's like another example where we see the tension between marginalized communities. Okay, so now talking about anti-Blackness within the LGBTQ community. Before we watch the video, I want to talk again about whiteness as a privilege and or as a property. And again, this is not to say that being light-skinned or white is associated with that. Rather, whiteness is a type of privilege that can be attained whether if it's given or whether you are born with it. And it puts you at a certain advantage, but also puts folks at a disadvantage. So this is a video that I found on Twitter recently, and it's and the person who tweeted it was basically commenting, stating that this person in the video was more concerned about whether they preferred being a top or a bottom, as opposed to stating their preference in terms of race. So we're gonna go ahead and watch that right now.
She get me brain that go dumb. Be broke, I ain't had no funds. I spend it just for fun. Get that hair, shit for lunch.
So as we see there, the person is more concerned about being either labeled a top or a bottom, as opposed to stating their preference. And it again promotes the idea that the white person, or like as they depicted the blonde haired and light skinned emoji, as more ideal in comparison to folks who are Black. And this again promotes subtle ideas of anti-Blackness, and it continues to perpetuate, especially with young viewers who are using TikTok. Fortunately, this video was deleted. However, we still need to keep accountable of these types of behaviors. And then when thinking about gay marriage and anti-Blackness, it's also important to recognize how gay marriage as an institution is argued as anti-Black, and I'm gonna go a little bit more in depth of that. And this is a present argument that's been argued by various scholars, and basically they say that gay marriage is inherently anti-Black. And that's because when we think of who's at the forefront of gay marriage, it's typically white, cis, women and men, gay, lesbian, who are demanding rights in order to receive the privilege of being married with one another and share property with one another. And folks have argued that gay marriage has appropriated civil rights language. It's used to promote white libertarianism, essentially saying that their priorities are to continue to sustain the institution of marriage as a Christian union that is inherently anti-LGBTQ and also anti-Black, and looking at how the white nuclear family and the union of hetero couples are used as a rhetoric to as a narrative against the Black community. For example, when we think about the Moynihan report, the Moynihan report was used to ask for funding. However, the language that they used was saying that unilateral structures of family that are in the Black community is a problem, and it is ingrained basically in their DNA that they have this issue. And they often compare it to a white nuclear family with hetero couples and have 2 children. And it's always used as a backlash and increased tension with one another. And also that gay marriage is, again, another institution that has been continuously used to elevate folks or put folks at a disadvantage. So
now we're going to open up another discussion. If there are any other examples of anti-Blackness within your community that you can think of, go ahead and leave that in the chat, and I'll give you all a few minutes to type it in. So someone said, I'm surprised by gay marriage being anti-Black. I find that unfair to the gay community as an ally who worked in gay rights orgs with people of color. In terms of appropriation, the appropriation of AAVE and slang in the LGBT plus community. The first gay couple to bring suit were interracial. Recently in Santee, there was a man in a store wearing a KKK hood, so obviously this is a blatant sign of racism and anti-Blackness. Being more tense/cautious than normal when walking past a Black person on the sidewalk, piggybacking off of Black movements and culture and not giving due credit. Example of anti-Blackness, belief that babies with lighter skin have more sensitive skin. Music taste, when people who are not Black start using words and sing songs about Black struggle. For LGBTQIA plus community, use of AAV appropriation of drag culture and making Pride into a party when it was originally a protest by Black and brown bodies. Linguistics work really hard to try and show that AAVE is a dialect of its own, but it is still looked down on. I think the idea is that certain structures benefit some communities more than others, and we want to interrogate that system. Also, the questions of how we review those systems. Someone else said, I consider myself, I don't know if that's supposed to say Chicane. Yeah, I am educated and respect everyone. Chicana, sorry. Yeah, I am educated and respect everyone. My friendship and love for African American has been a natural development of personality. Every time I go to Mexican stores or gatherings, we get looks, but they don't say anything or they call me Black, which I don't know how to respond because I don't want to give it attention. Black people not receiving the same amount of support/sympathy in disabled circles. So thank you all again for the level of participation.
Really quick, I actually wanted to address one of the comments that someone made in the very beginning about being surprised of gay marriage being considered anti-Black. I wanted to say that everything that we're talking about within this program, aside from me talking about cultural appropriation, is all information. By no means should be viewed as our wholehearted opinions on these different things. This is all different information that we have been able to find. And even Isabel in the beginning said that she had seen and heard from other scholars that this has been being discussed. So I just want to clarify, by no means are we saying that this is the truth. We're only giving information.
So another question that we want to pose before moving on to our next, or another two questions before moving on to our next section to close off. How is your activism inclusive, or what are ways that you keep yourself accountable? So you can go ahead and put that in the chat and also kind of just reflect on these questions. Okay. Sorry, there's so many coming in, I lost them. So making sure that your activism circles are diverse. Oh my God, I keep losing. I'm really sorry. I keep losing the chat. Okay. I look around at people I surround myself with and ask what voices I am not hearing. How am I consciously? So, okay, I'm just going to go for it. Sorry if I don't read your question, but they're coming in really fast and I'm losing everything. So every time I meet someone new, the question does not come out of my mouth, what race are you? That is something I never do assume. I never don't assume. I wait until someone knows me well enough to share, as culture is sacred to everyone uniquely and subjectively. Questioning situations are critically analyzing them, listening and keeping an open mind, open ears to others. I try to be cognizant of my privileges and never trivialize the lived experiences of minorities. Think about it from another person's perspective and see if it could be offensive. So for the sake of time, I'm actually going to go ahead and continue with the presentation, but thank you all so much for all the participation. So now we're going to get into how to call in friends and families. So first thing that we want to talk about is challenge the idea, not / statement, and not the person. So something we talked about before. No one likes to be challenged directly, so be sure to address their words and not them. So this comes into the play of the what you said is conversation versus the you are a conversation. So it's easier to say, hey, you know what, you said this and this can be offensive to so-and-so because of XYZ, instead of saying, hey, you're racist, you're being racist, and blah, 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 because then that person will just say, you know what, yeah, I'm being racist, what are you going to do about it? And there's really no room there for you to be able to, like, talk to them and have a discussion or that conversation with them. Also, be patient with them. Everyone was ignorant at some point, including you. So what this means is nobody, obviously, like, nobody is born, like, the second they're born, nobody is born racist or anything. And this is stuff that everyone learns. So it's easier to kind of be patient with someone and understanding that they are unlearning everything. And unlearning does take a really big process. Not everybody has the same amount of resources. Like, not everybody has access to webinars like this or access to different clubs and orgs like we do on campus, or different other resources that we might have had the privilege of having. So be patient when you're trying to call in someone, because again, everybody has a different standpoint and everybody is coming from a different experience. Don't overstep your understanding. If you're not able to explain it, do not address it. This kind of goes back to what Isabella said earlier about how we have to distinguish when we are talking about people of color and Black folks, because if you want to talk about something that is pertaining to the Black community and you say, well, all people of color blank, you're invalidating the struggles and the experiences of Black folks, and that's something that we don't want to do. And also, people, not one person of color can talk for all people of color. So also understanding that if it is not your place, you should take that step back and maybe provide other resources that this person can use to kind of learn more about other things, and be brave. It's not easy or fun, but it is needed. Again, taking that step back and saying, you know what, okay, like, let's have a decent conversation. It doesn't have to be a fight. It can be uncomfortable, especially with friends and family, but this is where you also check your own privilege and say, well, if I can tell someone on social media to not act a certain way, then I should be able to tell my own friends and family to not act a certain way. But also knowing your boundaries and understanding that if a person is unwilling to learn, then you have every right to step back, because again, not everybody, it is not your job to teach anyone anything. It is not your job to advocate for anything if you do not feel like you want to, or if it is doing more harm than good to yourself. Yeah. So with that, here are some resources that we used for our presentation and other just different resources. We do want to remind you that the webinar will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. So if you all have want to go back or have any questions, you can find it there. And this concludes our presentation. So we do want to say thank you all so much for all the participation that you all have been giving us. If you could please fill out the survey. And if you would like to if you would like to enter in our opportunity drawing that is at the end of the section of the survey, the end section of the survey, your email and your PID will not be associated with your responses, but we do look over these responses so that we can see how to improve and what things we should do different and what things you really, really like. So please take a moment for that. I will put the URL in the chat as well so that you all can access it from there.
Okay, yeah, and then if that is the end of the presentation, then I'll be sharing the link to receive credit for iLead. Please do fill out the form that they sent out in the chat earlier, though, so that you can provide feedback so we can continue to provide and have these events in the future. Thank you so much to our presenters, James, Isabel, and Giselle. It was a really informative presentation. And I look forward to hearing from the Cross Cultural Center every time you guys have a presentation. But yeah, so I'll be sending out the Google form link. Make sure to fill it out within about 20 minutes so that you are able to get credit for this workshop. We'll be closing the form within 20 minutes, so that's why you need to fill it out as soon as possible. But thank you so much.
I just dropped the link to the Cross Cultural Center's YouTube. Someone had asked what the YouTube page was called. It's called the Cross Cultural Center with a hyphen between cross and cultural. But in case it doesn't come up, that is the link you can use.
Also, I believe the iLead form is a Google form and our survey is a tiny URL, and I'll go ahead and redrop the tiny URL survey link in the chat for all of you to fill out. Oh, and at this time, if you have any questions about anything, you all can go ahead, about anything we presented on, you can go ahead and put it in the Q&A feature so we can try to answer your questions as they come up.